I'm Mickey Pellerano, and this is Time Lord TV, the show where we talk about astrology, occultism, and how they interface with art and culture. Today's topic is the lunar zodiac. The zodiac with which most of us are familiar, spanning from Aries to Pisces, is centered around the sun's movement throughout the year. Whereas in many ancient cultures, generally thought to predate the use of the solar calendar, a lunar zodiac was the primary method of time measurement. These systems are still used today, as seen in the nakshatras of Vedic astrology and the lunar mansions of so-called Western magic, where the monthly cycle of the moon is divided into 27 or 28 stations, each with its own meaning, symbolism, and hierarchy of spirits or deities. In the latter tradition, texts on the lunar mansions are relatively scarce, consisting mainly of two sections in the Picatrix, the essential source of Persian medieval planetary magic, and Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy. These descriptions are rich and compelling, as well as being useful for the forging of powerful talismans. But the available information amounts to really just a handful of pages. Our guests today, Chris Reppucci and ELODIE ST-ONGE-AUBUT, have been researching the lunar mansions, not only from a scholarly and historical purview, but also through their embodied experience of them through automatic drawing and writing, as well as dream work. Our musical guest today is Brion Starr, whom we're thrilled to have on the show because he was our cameraman on the first episode of Time Lord TV. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to start off with the astrological forecast for the month as usual, and then on to the show from there. Stick around.
February 27th, full moon in Virgo. November closes out with a full moon in Virgo. Happy and unafflicted, this moon shines in the bounds of Venus and in the decan of the sun, and she reflects the condition of both these celestials in Pisces. The theme here is going back to basics and learning new skill sets for how we can fashion the deep emotions and rich fantasies of Pisces into practical modalities in our lives. How are the emotional underpinnings we have newly discovered taking us to school, as it were? What must we polish up in our lives in order to create space for the fulfillment of our true desires? What creative or professional abilities must we develop in order to convey more meaning and poetry in our daily existence? What fantasies and fictions have the Sun, Venus, and Neptune woven that require our craft to be born into reality? An exalted Venus in Pisces will enrich these endeavors with sweetness and artistry. But the ruling planets of Virgo and Pisces, Mercury and Jupiter respectively, aren't having quite the easiest time of it. They are separating from a conjunction with Saturn in Aquarius, so now they know full well what they must renounce for their renovations. But they are both in square to Mars on the malefic star Algol. Algol is the eye of the Gorgon in the constellation of Perseus. This could signify blood in the form of dangerous enemies or inner monstrosities that we must confront and behead. Sweat in the form of arduous labors or taxing obstacles. Or tears, indicating the grieving necessary to take these important steps in the actualization inherent in the Pisces-Virgo axis. March 3rd, Mars-Gemini Ingress. At last Mars departs from his detriment in Taurus and enters the mutable air sign of Gemini, a sign of receiving vast arrays of data, reconciling thesis and antithesis, and concluding with harsh decisions. The warrior planet here can make for an anxious mind, scathing critique, and aggressive discourse. Mars will now find himself at odds with the Sun, Venus, and Neptune stellium in Pisces. He's likely to grow impatient with their psychedelic prognostications and bohemian inner journeys, and put the pressure on for cold hard facts and figures. Our hopes and dreams, our emotional and artistic yearnings, will now have to reckon with the epistemological demands of Gemini, and the expressions necessitated with a world obsessed with information. An exalted and combust Venus will be shaken by the pounding on the door of her private world. Is her artistry of value if it goes unseen? Must her poetry be commodified into tawdry memes in order to be validated? If beauty is in the eye of the beholder, what if no one's watching? The presence of the North Node sharing Gemini with Mars is an apt metaphor for the confused and manic attitudes of our culture toward viral visibility and its insatiable appetite for data. We must support the triumph of this noble Venus, dignified by exaltation, diurnal triplicity, and bounds. The aesthetic experience is a sanctified gestalt. The pearl's mind in the depths of Pisces need not be hawked in the markets or cast before swine. And the glory that is obscured is often the most holy. March 13th, new moon in Pisces. The new moon in Pisces on March 13th signifies the germination of just such a pearl. This gemstone is aptly associated with Luna for manifold reasons. Its spherical delicacy, lunar effulgence, oceanic provenance. Oysters in laboratories with no lunar exposure will still open their chambers on full moons. But it is the sacrificial act of birthing that is most resonant with this lunation, occurring in the very final degrees of the zodiacal structure. The formation of the pearl is wrought with intolerable pressure, just as the act of giving birth, with its pains and its perils. Joseph Campbell's pairing of the words sacrifice and bliss are the watchwords of this Wagnerian climax of the zodiacal drama. The Grail, filled with sacred blood, merges in ecstasy with the spear of Parsifal. Despite the ubiquity of crucified gods, we seem to have lost our understanding of the power of sacrifice. Here, Venus merges with the dissolving nebulae of Neptune, a mere 3 degrees from the new moon. All 3 of them engulfed by the scorching rays of the sun. This confluence of beauty, illusion, and impregnation will be hidden from the eyes of the profane. But all gods who die and are resurrected are solar deities after all. And we can direct our intentions toward plunging into these sacred mysteries with this new moon, with an understanding of the intrinsic bond between bliss and sacrifice, whether in love, creation, family, or self-realization, as we rise resurrected at the vernal equinox. March 20th, the vernal equinox. The sun bursting forth into the sign of the Ram where it finds exaltation is a dramatic apotheosis indeed. With the first quarter moon right on Mars and the North Node in Gemini. Here we will find this renewed solar avatar raging with ambition, eager to swing Excalibur right out of the stone. But after the sacred submersion of the new moon, we can approach this refashioning of the soul with the waters of enlightenment raging beneath the pulsing of the chambers of our heart. Venus will make her conjunction with the sun immediately after, mirroring the sun's alchemical trial through water at the new moon with her own trial through his fire. Venus in Aries is in detriment, contrary to the diplomatic socialite she plays in her Libra domicile. Here she is savage, seductive, ravishing, and fierce. With Mars on the North Node, the passions in Aries will be throbbing wildly, and we will see the interplay of the feral, the royal, and the enticing this Aries season. Arthur finds his exaltation in the second act of Aries after all, and Venus has decantic rulership in Act 3, unveiling the betrayals of Guinevere and the chthonic powers of Morgan Le Fay. With Mars in square with a very intoxicated Mercury in Pisces alongside Neptune, we are likely to see drunken brawls and lovers' quarrels. Sir Thomas Malory meets Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Just be careful with Mars on that node that you don't lose your head, whether at the cocktail party or the guillotine.
Brian,
Hey, Mickey.
5 months since you did camera on episode 1 of Time Lord TV.
Better be glad I'm not doing no more.
So what's this video we just watched?
This is a video for a song called Wild Time. It's off the album that we just put out called 2020. We put it out on New Year's. It's just a song about kind of reaching a point where you need to really let loose and get out and have a night on the town.
And it's inspired by the events of 2020.
Yeah, for sure. Feeling very much like you have to get out because you've been locked up for so long.
The cataclysmic astrological car crash that was 2020.
Yeah, for everyone.
So what do you got lined up for 2021?
We have an album coming out at the end of October, which I'm really excited about. It's called A Night to Remember, and it's sort of a story I wrote that takes place in just one night, and I recorded it in France at the Chateau de Hérouville, and then I came back to New York and I mixed it with Tony Visconti, and he added some more instrumentation as well, kind of post-production. And yeah, I'm really excited for it to come out October. Hopefully by that time we can play a record release show for it. Yeah, we didn't get to play a record release show for this album that just came out on New Year's, and it's just like you work so hard on something and then you can't even really see it into the world the way you would like to, but don't want to stop working either.
And what's the chateau in France where you recorded it?
The Chateau de Hérouville. It's a really incredible studio. We're actually the first band to record a full-length album there since 1985, I think. Like Bowie and Iggy recorded there, Elton John recorded there. We used the same piano that Elton John wrote "Candle in the Wind" on. And yeah, I mean a bunch of other people as well. But it was just really beautiful because basically we stayed there for 1 whole month, and we were able to wake up every morning and work on a new idea every day, get the sounds, have lunch, start messing around and getting takes, and get the song to the point where we could really make it sound special live, and then take a live take of it. And that's something I've wanted to do, record in that sort of capacity, in that way, for a long time.
Huh. Yeah. And was it your same band members that are based here in New York?
Some of them, yeah. And some of them at different points in the month. But the core group was myself, Nigel Wilson, who is actually mostly I've been playing with when I've been in LA, but he's the brother of one of my best friends, actually, and also just turns out to be an incredible composer. So that's been really cool, and we continue to work together now. And then Charlie, who's been in my band for a couple of years now, and we all went over and started together, and we kind of brought in a drummer, and just everything sort of meshed together, and we ended up recording 42 songs while we were there. So most of them will never even be released, probably.
Are these included, the ambient tracks included in that, or?
We did record a few ambient tracks, yeah. On my last album, Rope Memories, we had a few ambient tracks on the B side of that.
Right. And these are the tracks you'll be hearing during the astrological forecast of this episode. So that's awesome. I can't wait for the new record. And you just had a birthday, Aquarius, man.
Yeah, Aquarius, indeed.
Yeah, so it's
You're telling me I'll be lucky in love?
I think so. Well, you're having an 11th house perfection year,
waiting for that.
right? So it's going to be a year of, social contribution and social cachet and all these things. It ruled by Brian's beautiful moon in Leo as well, which is why he's such a great performer. But you've got some. You've got Venus going into your 7th house right now. So, Brian was born in Neptune, New Jersey. So he's got Neptune in his 7th house for quite a while. Venus in there for a good solid couple weeks in March. And then a little preview of Jupiter going in there this summer. And then 2022, that's when your 7th house blows up.
Oh, so that's the year where things start to happen in love.
Oh, yeah. The ocean will be rich with lotus flowers opening themselves up to you in every way. So it'll be really awesome.
Yeah. Well, it's been a hard few years, so that sounds nice.
Well, we've had fun.
Yeah, we've had a lot of fun.
And I'm so glad to have you on. This has been so awesome. Yeah. So stick around, and we will have Elodie and Chris up next, speaking of the lunar mansions, or the sectors of the lunar zodiac.
Inspired by the work of occultist Jake Stratton Kent, our guest today investigated the 28 mansions of the moon, alongside the 28 spirits of the Grimorium Verum, a text on invoking spirits from the Italian Renaissance, and also what they call the 28 shapes of the Greek Magical Papyri. These shapes are in the forms of animals, listed in the Prayer to Mene, found in the PGM, which goes as follows. I call upon you who have all forms and many names, double-horned goddess, Mene, whose form no one knows except him who made the entire world, Iaho, the one who shaped you, into the 28 shapes of the world, so that you might complete every figure and distribute breath to every animal and plant, that it might flourish. You who wax from obscurity into light, and wane from light into darkness, who begin to wane into a decrease. Ox, vulture, bull, beetle, falcon, crab, dog, wolf, serpent, horse, she-goat, asp, goat, he-goat, baboon, cat, lion, leopard, field mouse, deer, multiform, virgin, torch, lightning, garland, a herald's wand, child, key. I have said your signs and symbols of your name, so that you might hear me, because I pray to you, mistress of the whole world.
We are here with Chris Reppucci and ELODIE ST-ONGE-AUBUT, and we're going to be discussing the lunar zodiac. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Chris in real life and ELODIE remotely.
Hi.
What and why the distinction between the lunar zodiac and the conventional zodiac?
The astrology that we use and that the way it developed was largely the astrology of empires and kings and courts and the educated. And we started looking into the Lunar Mansions and seeing that there were other traditions that they might sort of overlap into and kind of swim around in pre-polis, indigenous and rural cultures.
I think that humans have been, like, the oldest calendars we have are lunar calendars, so it started there. If we think about astrology as like humans locating themselves in relation to the movement of the planets, like it really started with the motion of the moon.
When people are looking to the sky for information and engagement, and are they not doing astrology? I saw people taking the Picatrix and then just kind of generalizing the things in it and then trying to make up 28 sort of zodiac signs around it. And I was like, I don't know if there's enough there. I don't think we can take just one list with some fragmentary objectives of probably merchants and warlords and just kind of like scan them and say like, this is a lunar zodiac. And then you just kind of walk your way backwards through Neoplatonism and how they were framing society as being hierarchical and who's involved in a textual tradition. And you can kind of see like, oh, well, they're referencing more like, you know, like learned man's magic rather than experienced indigenous, like kind of like female participatory traditions.
So it's really these patriarchal biases that have affected these ideas we have about certain types of magic or certain categories of magic, and in effect they might be inaccurate. And this is what your research is really trying to uncover, right? The truth behind these different magical ideas through experience.
It has become sort of like a way of being now. Also, just like, I mean, the research, it's not just uncovering things, but it's also just uncovering things about life and about memory and about stories that you don't necessarily have to read in like a book, you know? Like the sky can speak of it and you can tune into it. That's an aspect of the research for sure. Like a lot of the lunar mansions that are considered malefic are just, yeah, they're just more nocturnal or feminine.
So in effect, there's a psychological disparity between, you know, the solar zodiac that we're all accustomed to using, and that being more influenced by this idea of, you know, hierarchy or power, as opposed to the lunar zodiac, which reflects a much more human experience or kind of a terrestrial experience rather than a political one, you might say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And like how, you know, how a human experiences life as an animal, you know, rather than as a member of the civilized world.
What does that mean? What experiences does that encompass?
Once you start engaging with the rhythm of the moon more, or just it's not even engaging, it's just becoming aware. It's like engaging with the night modality, with your senses, with your intuition, you know. I mean, we all do it, but it's just, I think the magical act happens when you're actually paying attention.
That's more where our work diverges from the attention paid to the most popular text that's used in the West to track the mansions, which is the Arabic compendium of talismanic magic called the Picatrix, which is around 900 AD, which does, you know, it's maybe not as much like huge civilization tops at that point, but certainly like merchants, powerful merchants and warlords. But then we're looking at a list from around, from the Greek Magical Papyri, from like some of the papyri in that group are from like the 1st century BC all the way to the 5th century CE, and mostly kind of was coming out of Thebes while Alexandria was in full swing, and it was part of more of a magical tradition of laid off temple priests who were kind of like on for 3 months out of the year, and then when they were off, they would hit the streets and do magic for hire. And so this was like people's magic, and it was street magic, and it was the concerns of people rather than empires. So you see different kinds of stuff like sex and money and household concerns and neighborhood concerns, like low enemies and friendships and bonds and sending dreams. But within it, there's a list of 28 shapes, and so we use that as it's rooted into the entire cosmology that they paint. That's more sort of horizontal and cyclical and circular, rather than the stacked Neoplatonic hierarchy of spheres stacked within each other. It's kind of a distribution of like organic and like body and like the functions of people more as beings and bodies, you know. And it's more sublunar and pulls you down into the sublunar level and layer. So it's not really concerned with you know, the ascension of the soul or the spirit as much as just like bringing and centering like the experience and the engagement of the human with other humans, with animals, and with the spirits that reside within the realm we're in and within the underworld, because it's still a culture that is very much connected to the dead.
But just to specify too, we use this as like a guiding principle. That's where a lot of it arises from. But we also compare with the traditional stuff from the Picatrix. Like, it's, you know, I think in our research, it's not like we are just adhering to what's in the Greek Magical Papyri. We use that as like a guide, and there's a lot of ideas that arose from that. But I think fundamentally, you know, it's about understanding each places the moon crosses in her cycle in a month, you know. And we have textual evidence, we have material, but as astrologers using this material, it's also important to understand, to experience what's there and not just rely on the text, you know. So yeah, we use the 28 shapes as entryway. We use the animals as entryway, but we also compare it to everything else, you know?
The Grimorium Verum is one of the sources that you're combining with the list from the Greek Magical Papyri as a way of categorizing these different stages of the moon. Can you tell us a bit about the Verum and the hierarchy or list of spirits that it contains that's helping with this work?
I first got turned on to the list by some comments made by Jake Stratton Kent in his Goetica encyclopedia, and he just kind of says there's 28 lunar mansions. There's this list from the prayer to Mene in the Greek Magical Papyri, and there's, if you add up the persona in the grimoire, the Grimorium Verum, it adds up to 28 primary spirits, maybe maybe people want to experiment with that. And then I saw him speak a little bit more about his experiments with that. He points out a certain 18ness to lists of spirits across like multiple grimoires. But then when you put on the intermediary spirit and the three superiors, and they each have two deputies, you get 28. And then you overlay it around the 28 lunar mansions, or 28 shapes, the 28 places. And then we originally made like spreadsheets where you could kind of see like, okay, here's what the Picatrix says, here's what the PGM says, the Greek Magical Papyri, here's what the Grimorium Verum says of what spirit falls there and what they're said to do and what their name is. And then you can look how that spreads across into like diasporic traditions, like a Kimbanda, which is syncretized heavily with the Grimorium Verum. And you can kind of, and then look at like the information that we're pulling up from, Greco-Egyptian, like syncretic, like mythos, history and all of that. And then kind of look at all of it and say like, where is it matching up? Where is it like, and they'll sometimes cut directly across, like you'll find in the Kimbanda stuff, like a certain piece that really reflects something from the Egyptian stuff, or sometimes it'll go all the way across the board. There's a couple examples of that. But there's something there. There's a shape there that like maybe the key of Solomon is more rooted into the decans and is more solar and stellar, and that the Verum is more lunar, and even the objectives in the Verum are it's said to be the more diabolical. But it is, like I said earlier, it's like, it's street magic. It's just like sex and drugs and rock and roll, and just like what people in poverty or in the the like middle class of that time needed to advance their station and position. It's not like learned magic as much, So it has these same kind of thematics of being like, this is what happens like in my life with my body, in my home, in my neighborhood. And so it seems to key in to the lunar cycle, and there's reasons for that in the text itself, the way it selects when you do a spell or when you do a working. It's like you want the moon crescent and you want it at the top of the sky, and it's like a kind of like rough version of how you might time like a lunar talisman in the Picatrix, using the midheaven. But we've found from just like the correspondences and synchronicities, I often find that I get more hits with the Verum than I do with the Picatrix to the PGM material and to the trance material.
Wow, so how do you tap into these other planes using the stations of the moon? What methods do you use to experience psychically what might be there, or explore what might be there in an effort to expand our knowledge of them?
Well, we use our senses. I think as astrologer also, and as researcher, I think it's important to have the text, and we use a lot of what's been written, and we apply a lot of trust to what's been written. But I think it's important also to observe and use our senses when we start engaging with these type of things, to see what happens, like what happens today. What are my senses telling me? What kind of dreams am I having? Because we're talking about the moon, we're talking a lot about sensing, dreaming, intuition. It's all these modes that are not necessarily rational, which we would attribute to the solar qualities, So it's, everybody, when you wake up, you have different things that arise, depending on your dreams. And then there's things that are going to happen in your day. And so everything, we use everything to inform our process, on top of also engaging magically every night with the places through Hecate and through the prayer to Mene, which is found in the Greek Magical Papyri. So then we engage by doing drawing and channel writing. which is just like one section of the research project, but a lot of information filters through because we're using, you know, imagination. And no, I wouldn't say imagination. I would say more like the imaginal or, you know, because imagination arises from our mind more so versus, you know, the imaginal space, which might be more collective.
With the lunar places, it's as if like the moon is just there in that stretch of the sky territory, and we're all just completely submerged in that, and most of us are just unaware, but it's coloring our dreams. The spirits that live in that part of the sky are present in our world. It's, you know, we're just experiencing different kinds of synchronicities. It's like we're all in a bath. Like tonight is, for as far as the Greek Magical Papyri, tonight the moon would be in the shape of crab. And so like crab mansion has, you know, from our automatic writing and trance drawing and all of the kind of trance work we do, has a kind of like rotational aspect. It has this dispersal nature, you know, like all the grains of sand and like the currents of water and this kind of rotating crustacean. And then we've looked, you know, into what does the crab represent in Egypt at that time, in Greece at that time, like in the zodiac, like a lot of people just like, they're not going to isolate the dreams they have tonight and then compare them with every time they have dreams in Crab Mansion. But if they did, I would almost guarantee there would be themes. Like you're returning back to the same place. Like it's almost destroys linear time. You know, like every time the moon is in Crab Mansion, we're back to this place of time, you know, and you're re-accessing this moment of the cycle, you know, rather than necessarily moving forward or backwards. You know, that's just the illusion of our metabolisms, you know.
Yeah. So it's an entirely different landscape that we're open to experience now if we learn how to time things this way, is what you're saying. Or we learn how to measure and calculate our experiences of the lunar zone in this way. So what could we expect from Crab Night?
It's very fertile. It's almost like the salty juices of fertility just before fertility, you know. And I want to say, you know, when we're speaking about how somebody might experience this mention, for example, it really depends on so many factors, including your own birth chart. But there's like fundamental stuff that keeps coming through, like, so to answer your question about crab, you know, especially through the visionary work and the drawing stuff, it's very like what comes through again and again, and that might be suggested just by thinking about crab, but there's this sort of movement in water. If you imagine like all sorts of little planktons and life, like inside water swirling around, but somewhere like in the Caribbean or something, it's very warm, it's very like inviting. A lot of time I had like cigars and like this sort of like Caribbean sort of vibe coming through. And I mean, we've been doing these drawings for like 16, 17 cycles, and you know, the first couple of times we were coming again to crab, I couldn't remember what I had drawn, and the same thing comes again in the drawing. So, you know, there's something there.
But as far as the brininess of crab and the fertility stuff that you were mentioning, if in the Egyptian material, when you look into what a crab might be, when Osiris had his phallus thrown into the Nile, some of the myths speak of it being consumed by a giant crab, like underwater, you know? So we'll be doing these things and they'll come up through the writing. The writing is very fertile. Speaking of all these kind of archetypes, or you'll see these like kind of swirling, rotational, almost like cosmogenesis type formations in the trance drawings of crab. But as we slowly accumulate more and more, I don't want to say data, but more of the stories that that get put into a confluence of Greco-Egyptian syncretism, we'll be like, well, holy shit, there it is, you know, like this, like the phallus gets consumed by the crab, you know, in this myth, and it makes so much sense, you know.
What is the mansion in Picatrix and Agrippa, etc., that would coincide with Crab?
The election is to destroy cities, place armies, vengeance of kings, destroy crops, destroy medicines, improve hunting, and cause friendship. And the talisman is for love between two people.
Which makes sense in a way if it does relate to the cycles of Osiris and Isis, you know, that they're both like separated and reconjoined.
But it's Beelzebub that rules over this mansion with the Verum. It's kind of like, it's like, okay, it's salty, you know, it's potent.
It reminds me of the imagery of kind of that first decan of Cancer as well, that very amniotic, like mother-child symbiosis of sharing the same food substance, right? And this kind of, and even the myth of the phallus of Osiris, say, or the testicles of Uranus being hurled into the sea.
Exactly.
And from
there,
there we get like Venus being born. This idea of birth through these kind of amniotic universal waters. And I will say, as an odd synchronicity, at least for you two, because I live with it all the time, but my natal Venus, who's born from the testicles of Uranus, is in Crab in 0 degree, and I am also Cuban and Caribbean, and from the land of cigars and these like warm waters and where tobacco is grown and things like this. So.
But it's edgy. It's an edgy place, and I think that's, you know, I like the Verum, because we follow the Verum, also the spirits ruling over these places, and there's an edginess here, and we're not talking about like incubation of mother and child. We're talking more about like the salty juices before like people get together, you know? There's an edginess a little bit here. It's fertile, but
right, there's that like friction and contention that are needed for that kind of a
love and hate. There's that sort of swirling and movement and motion that we could say is kind of mercurial, but it's really not the same thing.
Beelzebub is always said to be the most dangerous to make a pact with, and to his whole hierarchy going down is the kind of the edgiest to work with, and you want to make sure you have your whole procedure right. Like you might want to approach Astaroth first, you know, and then get used to the systems or whatever. But and then, you know, Beelzebub is, you know, if you translate that, it often, you know, it's like Baal, you know, it's like the Lord of the Flies, you know, like, and so there's something insectoid there. But these are like big forces, like the superiors in the Verum list are like, and one of the ways that, you know, in say, like the 1500s, or they might say like, oh, well, this is a Grand Duke, and this is like an emperor, and below him are so many deputies or whatever. But they're just using feudal society to kind of describe how one thing is pushed by another. But I think as far as the way it happens organically, it's more like smaller and bigger currents of water or fronts of weather or air, you know? So it's like we're talking about the breath, you know, going back to the Greek Magical Papyri, it's the 7 primary sounds of the breath of the creator distributing into the 28 shapes of the world. So it's like the whole world animated. This is like real animism, you know, and the whole thing, like there's these pushes and pulls. And so what's being described in Crab, like how you were saying, like an attraction of people, and two people might come together in love and lust, and they might breed. But there are these animalistic forces that are coming together to like, they're going to love each other. They're going to create stuff together. They might destroy each other. They might destroy parts of each other. They might end up being warring families. And there's this kind of like animalism that goes through it. And then, so what's happening with Crab is animating something that is maybe a little bit more insectoid and a little more cold and uncaring to humankind. And so this nature of Beelzebub is like this big current that pushes a lot of other intelligences, a lot of other spirits, and it has a primary nature. I almost want to start developing some other terminology besides archetype. You know, as archetype is very philosophical and heady, what we're looking at are like, these are like the real like body feel pushes and pulls of a cosmogenetic kind of inhabited cycle of lunar submersion.
No, for sure, because it feels much more biological. I
Yeah.
mean, everything you're describing is so much
So
more
biological.
Yeah, exactly, like cellular and in this way. And it's interesting to note that these categories that fall into the crab are, yes, acts of, you might even say reproduction or creative, but they're not erotic. They're almost violent, right? They're, I mean, especially in the case of the dismemberment, right? We have this kind of severing, right? From which something is born. It goes against this conventional idea.
Like think of like insectoid sex, you know? Like they're just like, they're like destroying each other's exoskeletons to deposit like sperm
Or like
and eggs
praying mantis.
yeah, exactly.
It's more all encompassing than the archetypes that we're used to seeing might be. There's so much more fluidity and overlaying here that I think that happens, and it is irrational, and it does force us to almost like start tipping into other contradictions and categories all at the same time. So what advice could you offer for people who are like me, who are trying to engage with this more, maybe become more sensitive to these realms?
Like people might hear this and think, oh, this is outside of the realm of what's possible, but like everybody's doing it every day. We're all sensing, we're existing, we're feeling things, we're dreaming. Like if you decide to have a practice with it, you could, for example, start simply with like where the moon was when you were born. Once a month, you could say, okay, I'm gonna have some kind of creative practice where the night when I have my lunar return, just pay attention to my dreams, pay attention to what comes up. Not every mention are gonna speak to you the same way. There's some mentions where we got so much more information just by the nature of our chart, by the nature of our interaction. Like there's places that speaks more to us. And I think any magical practice, it's about journaling and paying attention on like the times where it's like there's more stuff going on, And if there's more stuff going on and you're having crazy lucid dreams or crazy downloads or, a lot of synchronicities, take note, look where the moon is, that's a good start. It's the practice that's going to reveal itself to you,
Yeah, and I think the idea behind that, we've been trying to frame what the purpose might be, and we've been talking about it as like, if what would be the purpose of frequenting a forest and getting to know it really well. Once you develop a familiarity with a forest, then you can be a guide in that place. You can help people that might be lost. You can heal people that might need plant medicine. You can hunt because you know the motions of the animals, etc. Like at first, you might not go into that. Like I'm going to hang out in this. I'm going to start like just going for hikes in this place. It might be purely for pleasure, and exercise. But eventually, you become familiar with the place, and it becomes valuable as you've been engaged with it for so long. I think. We've said before that it's kind of a synchronicity system. Like eventually you'll just get the rhythm. You'll be feeling it yourself. You won't have to look. You'll be like, oh, I knew it. People in your dreams who are related to that mansion will be coming up. You'll, like I was saying before about how it sort of destroys linear time. You'll come back to that place in full experience, and you'll just know the vibe. You'll know the saturated feeling, and then over the course of your life, you're like, oh, I have a feeling of what's going on in nonlinear reality, and that's in itself, I guess, is the value. And I guess I would extend that to say that if the imaginal world is connected to the postmortem state, which is connected to the dream world, the real ultimate purpose beyond just what you'd experience here in nonlinear time is navigation in the postmortem state. You're like, yeah, I kind of know my way around the sublunar a bit.
That's pretty advanced, I would say.
Yeah.
But really, I think in a more maybe pedestrian way, we can say that anybody with an interest of what goes on in their dreams would probably benefit from this.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Right?
Everything that ever existed resides in the sky as stories and as memories and as dreams. and the moon amplifies it. So in a way, it's like the same as it would be with traditional astrology. Yes, the moon is a sort of conduit, because that's the role of the moon. She reflects the light of the sun. She reflects what's around her, but in a more accessible way, you know? Like, we can't really look at the sun directly. Like the light of the sun through reflected by the moon is a lot more fertile, you know?
For like spirit work, but then for artists, you know, because this is really an experience of like the moon just kind of streaming into you and into your stream of consciousness and into your like awareness of noticing all of these impressionistic, synchronistic layers, all of this materia and body feel and imagery.
What are the qualities of this sublunar sphere that we are all immersed in, that we are all feeling all the time? And how can we have a clearer, I know that it contradicts the meaning of it to have a clearer perception of it, right? But but how can at least we have a more lucid experience of it?
Well, embody yourself, you know? Like, it's really about being embodied, I think. Like, it's about taking advantage of, yeah, just like experiencing your senses. Not your mind so much.
Yeah, just remembering you're an animal, you know, and using your animal body to process information the way an animal body would, rather than just a brain would as an operating system or something, you know.
Wow. That's massive. Well, I'm super inspired. This has been incredible. I really want to dive further into this and start figuring out the inner structure of my own creativity, my own physicality, and my own connection to this sphere because of, you know, the work that you guys have done. And I'd be happy to be a part of it. If you want to guinea pig my dreams or anything like that, feel free.
We definitely want to guinea pig your dreams.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys both so much for being here. This has been really, really great.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Thanks.
It was my absolute pleasure. And thanks to all of you for watching. This has been March 2021, and we will see you next month on Time Lord TV.